Chris Ware is here. He is a cartoonist whose work is characterized by his meticulous design, emotional depth, and ambitious scope. The author Zadie Smith says, quote, "There is no writer alive whose work I love more than Chris." Here's a look at his work.
Part of comics as a medium is based around that idea of drawing spaces and moving through memory spaces and then seeing what happens when you're drawing on the page. I try to allow that to structure the stories that I write.
The way Chris thinks, what he's obsessed by, does have to do with memory and loss, as if each panel was kind of like a little memory palace where you store a thought, a past, and find it again.
Drawing is simply another way of seeing, which we don't really do as adults. Children see all the time. Children are always drawing with their eyes. I think that's part of what becoming an artist is getting back in touch with that sense of experience and wonder that you have as a kid. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood. I went to a private school with very small classes, so I had the unfortunate experience of not being able to reinvent myself every year. So I was just like, I'd come back the next year and they're like, "Oh, there he is again," and I was the nerd. I started drawing as a way of controlling things and disappearing into another reality. When you're drawing something, you're engaged in a way that sort of shuts down language and it allows you to see reality as it is. I'll be drawing a character sometimes and I'll have to cut my hair, but I'll be ignoring that fact and the hair of the character will get longer. Or if I'm not paying attention to exercise, and that character will get fatter. It's really weird. There's some sort of mirror neuron thing in comics.
Among his peers, Chris's output is unique. For starters, the sheer scale of it. It's almost like he has so much that he wants to do visually that it's like the pages aren't big enough. So you'll have these pages where there'll be a giant baby in the center of the page. Or there's a series of pages in one of his books where on one picture there's a woman standing there with her clothing and you turn the page and then she's without clothing, you turn the page and it's her skeleton. And that's just the center of the page, and all around it there's all these other things happening. Just like the sheer inventiveness of the visuals, and just like the colors and the draftsmanship is just so beautiful.
There is such a thing as a Chris Ware palette. There are some blues, some blue-grays, and some tones. It's a language. You can speak in color.
For me, color is sort of like a second story that's kind of overlaid on the page itself. When I'm drawing a page, I'll think about, I know that a certain character, there's going to be something that has to be a certain color. And then when I start to color the page, things start to happen on the page in the same way that happen when I'm drawing the page, where they start to connect in ways that I wouldn't have otherwise predicted. Like a red thing here will connect to something red down here, and then if I want that to be highlighted, I might make things more blue, and then the blue becomes a secondary sort of story.
There's a tremendous amount of melancholy in the stories. And Chris defends that, as he says, there's this whole part of living, which you just feel that way.
There's two kinds of loneliness. There's a loneliness of being alone and the loneliness of being with another person, and that's kind of what life is.
I often have to counter people who say, "Oh, Chris Ware, isn't that depressing?" And it's often people who haven't really spent time with it.
And I feel like what's interesting about the work is that while the stories and the people are often very sad, the images are just bursting with life and color and expressiveness.
Jimmy Corrigan, especially, the book itself is about somebody who doesn't see the world in a beautiful way. So the book itself I designed to be hopefully as beautiful and colorful as I could to kind of contradict the character's malaise and to say, no, that's not actually true. The world actually is this way if you pay attention to it.
His work isn't just an interesting set of graphics. One can also see, once one enters into it, that they have an incredibly strong emotional wallop.
The stories jump forward and backward in time, span generations, careen from the most private internal feelings to wide shots of the city or the vast expanse of the World's Fair. There are dreamscapes and robots and overweight superheroes. We see characters at every age of their lives. The temptations of monogamous married life are pondered near a discarded soda can by a deeply neurotic bee. What do you call this attempt to cram such vast and varied chunks of the world into a work of art? Is there a German word for that?
That's very nice.
Is there a German word for that?
Jeez. I don't know. I don't know what
So
to
what
say.
are you thinking, looking at that?
I feel very embarrassed that that people are being so nice about my stuff. It's a very
that was brilliantly done by a guy named Tor Paquette, who you know.
Yes, he did it. Wow, I'm really flattered. I don't know what to say. My hands are shaking. So.
Did he capture you?
I don't know. Whenever I see myself on the outside, I forget what it's like to be on the inside and vice versa. So I forget what my face does, and it's very strange. It's sort of, I mean, that's what the job of a cartoonist is to inhabit a body and then try to put that on the page so that when the reader reads that, they can feel through that. But then when I see myself in reality, that's not the experience I have at all. So.
And all of this came from Omaha, Nebraska.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, it's a very middle of the country, middle class, middle everything. At least that was my upbringing. So I had a very charmed childhood, I think.
Charmed?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I don't, very little to work against other than maybe being the nerd in the school and not terribly athletic, which is a very mild way of putting it. So, but that's a story of hundreds of thousands of kids. So
the majority, I think.
Yeah, at least those who maybe end up going into the humanities, as they used to call it. So
the humanities.
Yeah.
You were raised by your mother and her mother. Huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't know my dad. He left very early on, my biological father. And I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house while my mom was at work at the Omaha World Herald. And both were incredibly supportive and generous to me and encouraging me of my artwork, especially my mom, who signed me up for art classes at the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha and would take me down there to look at the artwork, the sort of the Renaissance paintings they had on display and the modern art, and I would scratch my head and wonder what it was all about. But I really wanted to learn how to draw. It seemed like something that I could maybe possibly attain somehow, or have the skill. It seemed like my only hope, basically, as a human being, was to be able to.
What did Peanuts mean?
Well, Charles Schulz, I think, was the first cartoonist to create an empathetic character. Before his comic strips were something you looked down on and laughed at. And his genius was to take his heart and put it into the artwork and into every line that he made so that the reader would go into the picture and come back out through the characters and feel through those characters. And Charlie Brown was a character that you felt not only for but through. I mean, it moved me so much when I was a kid that he didn't get Valentine's that I sent him a Valentine. Or I gave it to my mom to send to him. I don't know what she did with it, but...
I'm sure she sent it to him.
I don't know. But, the fact that somebody can do that just with a simple little doodle, he's capturing something about the fundamental truth of a human being in a tiny little, almost dumb drawing that would make a kid's heart break in a way. That's something. There's really something there that is powerful, I think. So
take a look at this. This is from an earlier show of mine in May 9th, 1997. Here it is.
I suppose there's kind of a melancholy feeling or an area in, I think, a lot of cartoonists, because cartooning, like all other humor, comes from bad things happening. People say, well, why don't you have Charlie Brown kick the football? Why don't you do this or do that? And I said, well, that would be wonderful. It's happy, but happiness is not funny. I wish we could all be happy, but it isn't funny.
Is it your experience then that, say, for great comics and for people who can make other people laugh, that humor in fact comes out of sad lives?
Oh, definitely. One of the great scenes of all time is City Lights, where the blind girl recognizes that Charlie Chaplin is the one that paid for her surgery. I don't think there's ever been a more tender scene ever filmed, but it was sad, but funny.
Wow. Even hearing his voice, about every year or so, I listen to a recorded interview with Schulz that was done by Gary Groth for the Comics Journal, just as a way of sort of centering myself and kind of keeping a sense of what it's really all about. As he's such an unpretentious, warm person, and it comes through in not only just what he's saying, but even just the way he says it. So.
Did you learn about empathy from him?
I think so. Yeah, I think right off, probably that. And I remember being deeply moved by Thornton Wilder's Our Town. There was a televised version of it in the 70s that I watched with my mom that really moved me. The scene where the character's trying to get the family members to look at her, to just simply look at her, because life is going by too quickly. So.
There's so many references to your mom and your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had a profound influence on...
Yeah, I think I'm lucky. I mean, I was raised by women. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a big plus. In a way, for a while I thought maybe, not having a male role model other than maybe my grandfather, or and then my stepfather David, who's been by far the greatest role model of my life in that regard, and a great man. But I feel lucky as a kid because I didn't know how to fix things. I didn't want to punch kids. I didn't want to be aggressive. I wanted to kind of back off and be by myself and try to keep to myself and understand things and fundamentally be nice to people, which I guess sounds naive and childish, but I don't know.
The life drawings in your undergraduate art department did what for you? They
helped me see and helped me to empathize with people. You can't not empathize with somebody when they're sitting there in front of you with no clothes on. There's some life drawing teachers would say, like, don't think about the fact it's a naked person. Like, how can I not think about the fact that it's another person there that's very vulnerable? So I think it's important to try to put that into the drawings, and also to not think about the human body necessarily as an accurate construction, but what is it really? What are these particles that make up our bodies, and the chemicals, and then the biological form that then contains this consciousness and this sense of potential, wounding or arrogance. It's very strange. That's what you need to try to get down. Not the light and the dark and the angle of the elbow. Nobody cares about that. So.
You once said, I think, that drawing is one of the most valuable skills anyone can learn.
Mm-hmm. I think it's totally true. I think I kind of said this earlier, but the act of drawing is seeing, is trying to see something, and it puts you into a completely different mental state. It puts you into a state of being in that moment for that specific moment and understanding reality in a way that adults are very, very good at not doing. We spend most of our lives kind of getting out of the way of things, trying to remember stuff, trying to get through the day. Certain regrets and problems, mistakes that we made either an hour before or years before come back to us. So we spend much of our time just in this sort of cloud of remembrance and anxiety, but trying to live in that moment is a very difficult accomplishment. I think drawing encourages that more than anything.
Tell me about Winsor McCay.
Winsor McCay was a cartoonist at more or less the turn of the century. He invented a character named Little Nemo, but he also is more famous for essentially inventing animated cartoons. He didn't invent them, but he refined them to the point that he might as well be given the credit for inventing them. And his ability to divide time and space on the page allowed for a language of gesture to kind of inculcate a sense of movement on the page that felt real. If you read his pictures, not words, don't read the words, but you read his pictures as a sequence, just go over them in the same way that you would read words, it comes to life on the page in a magical way that suddenly seems like there's something moving on the page. It's a very strange sort of alchemy. And that, to me, that's the basic engine there of comics, of making a drawing seem to come to life on the page. And George Harriman was the artist who I think took that and
he was an early influence as well.
Yes, yeah, he created Crazy Cat. This is his best known strip by far.
When did you experiment with animation?
When I was in art school, I did some animation, and it took a very long time for just a few seconds of reward, and I didn't like the passivity of it. I didn't like that when you were done with something, you watched it. I like the activeness of comics, that you read them and that you make them come to life in your mind. The animation it's an art of watching rather than making it happen, I guess.
And Art Spiegelman?
I started reading Raw magazine in my teen years when I was searching for put it mildly, or anything, of searching for pornography in the back room of the comic shop in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yes.
And I'd managed to graduate to the point where the owner of the store would sort of surreptitiously let me go back there and look for the copies of Heavy Metal and stuff like that. And there was a magazine sticking out of the back of the bin that said Raw on it. And I thought, oh, right, this is it.
I found it.
I pulled it
The
up,
Motherlode.
but it was just these like weird European comics. And I thought, oh, well, whatever, right? But I bought it anyway. And that one issue changed my life. Front cover was by Joost Zwart, a Dutch artist. It was colored by Francoise Mouly, now art editor of The New Yorker and Art's wife. And that issue, I can point to that issue as sort of making me realize there was something in that of putting pictures together on a page that
changed your life.
Yeah, and that got at something almost kind of literary. So,
what have you learned from him?
From art?
Yeah.
Everything. I talk to him, every month or two on the phone, and I just think, I don't even know what good I'm doing to him talking to him, because pretty much every idea I have in my brain came from him in some way or another, either in sort of from reading his work or talking to him over the years. All of the ideas I have I can trace back to his efforts. So, and I certainly taking the idea of drawing comics as a medium of self-expression, that was really codified by Raw and by Mouse. And taking the efforts of artists like Robert Crumb and Kim Deitch,
Right.
underground cartoonists, and taking it and basically presenting it in a way that dignified it and didn't make it dismissible, which a lot of cartoonists didn't really like. They liked that kind of throwaway, junky quality of underground comics. But
When did the relationship with the New Yorker begin?
when I think it was about in college or so, Francoise started asking me to contribute ideas for the covers. I was very, very nervous and felt completely not up to the snuff or up to par. But over the years, she's been extraordinarily encouraging.
Aren't you too smart to be too modest?
I think that you have the relationship inverted. I mean, if I try to see things as accurately as I can, and I can see very accurately that I'm, first of all, not very smart, and second of all, I have serious deficits in the aesthetic skill set that I continually try to rectify, and it's just an attempt to see things.
When you see a deficit, you constantly try to rectify it.
Yeah, and it's
perceived, but at the same time, it should not. Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, I really do understand the sense of believing that you can see. You have the power to see how great things can be, or how much there is to know, or how much reference would be valuable. All of that, so that seems like a mountain. Yet at the same time, don't you have to look at what you have created and see it for what it is and what it means and what it reflects?
I try. Yeah, that's kind of the bad part, because that's when I actually do see it, and all I see are the problems and the mistakes. Yeah, and it's. I don't know. I mean,
but this doesn't make you, to use a terrible expression, a half-empty guy, does it? Half full, half empty, the kind of thing.
I'm probably a half-empty guy, definitely. At least at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm trying to sleep, definitely. That's I don't know.
Trying to sleep.
Yeah, it's. It's my own problem. I guess everybody's just I thought if I tried hard enough, when I was younger, I thought if I keep going, I'll get to the point where I won't feel this way anymore, and I'll finally feel confident about what I do, and that's just never happened.
You've never? Never?
No, I mean, when I'm done with something and it's sat there for maybe 2 or 3 months, and I look back at it, I think, well, maybe that wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Jimmy Cargan, the smartest kid on earth.
When I see that now, I can see a lot of problems. But when
you see a lot of problems?
Sure.
Yeah, but can you see also a lot of accomplishment? Can you see
some of it? Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna, but it's at the same time, it's. I think Brahms said that something doesn't have to be good; it just has to be complete. Or I'm misquoting him something, but it's something about that. And there's a lot of unattended difficulties in that in other books that I've done. And so I actually try to structure books in such a way that allow for those unattended things to become a part of the story rather than an antagonistic.
But what did Jimmy Cargan do for you?
Well, other than proving to me that I could stick with something for 7 years and get through a whole book, I guess. Certainly that. It also helped me pay the rent finally and away from my own stuff, which is then changes your life completely over, because before that I was just drawing comics on the side, and then all of a sudden to draw this stuff and have it be the source of food and sustenance for myself and my family, it becomes a completely different relationship then, and then you have to worry about certain things, like you start to get towards that moment where you feel less inventive or worried that if you try something new it might not work out as well, which is a bad state to be in. So it's a difficult thing. I look at Frank Lloyd Wright and I think how he reinvented himself so brilliantly every few years. He almost is like he took the one thing he was avoiding in one phase of his work and embraced it in his new work, and I wish I could do that. I try to do things like that, but I'm much too hesitant, I think. So.
You think? Too hesitant?
I think so, yeah. I wish I had a little more oomph or something. I'll do anything I can do to avoid sitting down at the drawing table.
Will you really?
Yeah.
The thing you love the most.
I don't know if it's
the thing you love the most.
Well, that's probably being a little charitable. I mean, I don't know if it's... I love being done with it when I finish a page, but getting started is...
Because it's hard? Because it's painful? Because it's...
It's difficult. It's self-accusatory. It makes me feel like I'm not, getting started is the very hard. But once I get going, it's a little bit easier. And since I'm writing as I'm drawing, when I get to the point where I'm actually inking it, then it's not quite as difficult. So, but I don't know.
How long has this been in the creation?
I think Charles Myers, the publisher, invited me to do it 2006. I had a show at the MCA.
That's 11 years ago.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. At the MCA Chicago, and I didn't feel at that time that I had enough work yet to make an art book, worthy. I don't even know if I still do. But then once I finished my previous book, Building Stories.
Okay, so when you finished this, did you feel a great sense of pride, accomplishment, satisfaction?
Well, it printed well. I was happy about that, because that's the horrible part of being a cartoonist, is if you work years on a book and then it goes to the printer and it comes back and the blue is completely off, that the whole thing is ruined.
That would be a bad day.
Yeah.
That would be a bad day.
Yeah. That is it. But it printed well, and it was an attempt just to put everything, because working in a medium of reproduction that all cartoonists have to do, and especially in my generation, doing work occasionally commercial that could be interpreted as artwork but wasn't artwork. It was simply drawings made to pay the bills. I didn't want to confuse those two. I wanted to try to separate the two. And I like the junkiness of comics. I want to try to present it well. But the fact that they're dismissible as a printed medium is important to me, because that allows for an honest relationship with the viewer that I think in the fine art world is not necessarily as cut and dried. If you read a comic strip or you look at a painting and you don't understand it, you blame your own ignorance of art history. If you read a comic strip and you don't like it, you just think the cartoonist is an idiot. And I think that's a very honest relationship. So
with a cartoonist?
With a reader.
Oh, you, in other words.
Yeah, and I think the fact that people feel free to criticize or throw something away or think, I don't want to take this book to my next apartment, I'm just going to throw it away, I think that's good. So,
tell me about Building Stories.
Building Stories was a book I started in 2001 and finished in 2011. It's 14 separate books in a box. The idea was to have a story with no beginning or no end. You wouldn't know where to start or stop it. And that hopefully reflected something of the way that we remember reality rather than the way we think we go through it, which is straight, which we don't. We can go through it and put it back together in all sorts of different ways. So it's also the way we meet people. We learn about them in a piecemeal way. You don't meet somebody and hear their biography from birth to that moment. You figure things out about them and put them together in sort of a mosaic. So, and the whole book itself was kind of an attempt to try to make like a dream book, the sort of thing that everybody, I think, imagines at certain points in their dream life, where they'll hear a beautiful piece of music or see a wonderful painting or an amazing film, and they'll wake up and think that was and then they'll realize, like, wait, I made that up. That was in my mind. I did that myself. And then it fades. And I wanted to try to make a book that had that sensation to it, at least, something that seemed almost untenable in a way. So,
who's the woman at the center of it?
The woman at the center of it is an unnamed protagonist who goes through art school, sort of avoids the creative life out of self-doubts, and then ends up getting married and having a kid and finding a certain sort of solace and centeredness in her life. because of that, but then regrets her giving up on her creative life. But the book itself is the attempt to make that dream object of the one moment in her consciousness where she imagines this book in a box about her life just in a flash. So
you like the tactileness of books.
Very much so, yeah. It's the most interactive technology there is, yeah. All of this stuff about things that move around and click and say, I hate all that stuff. There's nothing more interactive than reading pictures and having something happen on the page, or having something that you don't have to plug in or worry if you have the right decoding software. I've done a few things for, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I've done a few things for like animated things online that now aren't watchable anymore because the language they were written in or whatever is just no longer available. So it's disappeared. But books are still readily readable to anybody who has the technology of eyeballs and a brain. So
listen to what Charles Schulz said. This is the beginning of a preface by our class. Charles Schulz once said that cartooning was a fairly sort of profession. You have to draw fairly well. If you draw really well, you'd be a painter. You have to write fairly well. If you wrote really well, you'd be writing books. It's great for a fairly person like me, which raises the question, what happens if you draw beautifully and you're an expressive, poignant writer? What sort of cartoons result from that? You hold the answer in your hands. To be fair, Chris Ware is not alone. He's part of a generation of artists who create comics with ambitious imagery that are also just great emotional stories.
That's very nice.
That's pretty damn good.
Yes, he's a very nice person. So he's been a good friend for many years, and I mean, in a lot of ways, Ira kind of showed me how to structure a story. I mean, I think he's probably like the only person in America with a degree in semiotics who actually is employed. You know,
he's the only one I know.
Yeah, but from working with him and collaborating with him on stories and seeing how he structured them, I really learned a great deal.
Memory is an important theme.
It's all there is. That's all we have.
Memory.
Yeah. That's honestly, I mean, there's nothing else we can grab onto. There's nothing else it doesn't matter. That's the only thing that we can claim as our own. That's how we get through life.
Our memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all we'll have.
A sense of it. A memory connects us to everything.
And it's a construct, and it's like I said earlier, it's in large part I think is imaginary and a fiction. A lot of what we believe about certain people are just simply stories we've made up about them and we start to believe, or we, I'll imagine, what are my friends doing right now? I wonder if they really think this about me. They probably do, and then that ends up in your larger novel about yourself that you're writing about yourself. And
it's a beautiful book.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm very accurate. So you want the reader to take away what?
A feeling of what it feels like to be alive, I guess.
That's
to have
exactly
a sympathetic sense of that feeling. So
connect to what it means to be alive in your time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What else can we do? I mean, that's what I look for when I read books. When I read books written in the 19th century, I want to know, what did it feel like to be in a human body at that time, and in as accurate and in as much detail as possible, so that I can hopefully not make some of the same mistakes, and understand how to live my life. But again, it's not a prescriptive instruction manual kind of thing. It's like listening to a song or understanding a sense of something intuitively or something, or internalizing something. So
you say, by writing, I mean not sitting down and writing everything out and then tediously adding in images later, but allowing it all to happen at the same time. Uncertainty, the way we remember life itself, with just as much overlap and exchange in our mind's eye.
Yeah, that's true. And I think in comics that's what all writers do anyway, even if they plot everything out. Once you get down to the business of writing, you're still filling in the cracks, and there's a degree of improvisation there that comes from the way one's brain is already connected. It's a highly organized thing. It's the only organ that named itself, right? I guess it's but as a cartoonist, you have the added advantage of drawing and remembering at the same time. And when you draw something that you've recalled, it reminds you of something else, and you actually enter that space on the page, and it becomes this sort of a kind of continuous loop of memory and understanding that grows on the page as you're working on it. So, and there's something about the reading of the pictures that makes it especially tied to language and memory, I believe. So it's not like painting.
How long have you been working on Rusty Brown?
It's like that's embarrassing. Since 2001. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've done other books at the same time. I try to work on them at the same time so that when I get sick of one story, I can work on another.
Move to the other.
Yeah.
So it's coming out next year.
Yeah, part of it is the first half. The other half will be done when I'm very, very old. So the lie I tell myself now is that the idea of working on a book for 17 or 20 years is possibly interesting, because otherwise it's just completely insane. So, but I don't know. That's the only. I work as fast as I can.
So if some kid comes up to you and says, "Why are you a cartoonist?"
My daughter asks me that frequently, actually. She was recently sitting at my drawing table looking at my pages that were hanging that I have for reference, and she said, "Dad, is there anybody out there who's even really excited about this book coming out?" And I thought, maybe there's not. Maybe she's totally right. There's nobody. Me. I want to have it done. But I don't know. And she asked me recently too. She said, "Are you sad? Do you dislike yourself?" And I said, "Well, sort of, And she said, "Yeah, but you're doing all this work and it looks good and people seem to like it, and you shouldn't feel so bad about yourself. In fact, to do that is kind of self-indulgent, don't you think?"
God.
And I thought, wow,
wow.
what is,
you
how
don't
is
need
it
a
possible?
psychologist. You don't need a psychologist. You got your daughter.
I guess, 12 years old, like what is so weird that...
It's just amazing.
Yeah, she's something else. But
thank you.
Well, thank
for
you.
coming to the table.
I don't know what to say. I am so flattered and deeply moved to be here. It means a great deal to me. So
It means a lot to me.
thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
All right.
Thank you for joining us. See you next.